Dreamtime history for sleep.
Before we confront the divine fury, know this. The true power of the Lioness goddess is not a myth for the masses. It is a terrifying reality etched into scorched temple walls, a truth hidden within hieroglyphs few dare to read. And here is the most astonishing part. New evidence suggests her legendary plague of destruction was not a fable, a tale, but a historical event that nearly unmade the world. This revelation has forced scholars to rethink everything they knew about ancient power. So make sure you watch this video until the very end. Let's begin to understand this goddess of plagues and passions. We must look not to the dark earth, but to the blazing sun. For Sekhmet was not born of shadow, Sphinx, she was born of light. A terrifying, all-consuming light. Sphinx, the physical manifestation of the Eye of Ra, the sun god's own celestial weapon. Sphinx, this eye was a distinct divine entity, an extension of Ra's power that could act independently as both a fierce protector and a devastating aggressor. It was the burning glare of the midday sun, the scorching heat that could give life or utterly destroy it. There was a golden time when the great god, Ra, ruled on earth in a human form. 'Twas the sun, the king, the source of all life. Humanity lived in his light, and the cosmos was held in perfect balance by the principle of Mata, divine concept of order, truth, and justice. The rivers flowed, the crops grew, and gods walked among mortals. But Ra grew old. His bones became like silver, his flesh like gold, and his hair the color of lapis lazuli. Seeing his frailty, humanity, his own creation, began to whisper. They plotted against him, their hearts filled with disrespect and rebellion. The balance of Mat was threatened. Their treasonous words did not escape the sun god. Enraged and betrayed, Ra summoned the oldest and most powerful deities to his secret council. He sought not advice, but affirmation. He would not allow his creation to defy its creator. He would unleash upon them the full, untempered fury of his divine power. He would send forth his eye. For this task, he called upon Hathor, the golden goddess of love, joy, and music. She was beloved by all, the gentle daughter of the sun, but within her, as within the eye of Ra itself, lay a dual nature. Picture this transformation. The laughter in her throat curdles into a guttural roar. Her graceful form contorts, swelling with divine power and rage. Her soft eyes ignite with the fires of 1,000 suns. The gentle cow goddess was gone. In her place stood a new being, a terrifying lioness, wreathed in fire and violence. She was Sekhmet, the powerful one, born from a father's wrath. Her mandate was absolute. A terrible but necessary act of cosmic purification. It was not born of simple malice, but of a need to restore the sacred order. Humanity had poisoned the world with its arrogance, and Sekhmet was the antidote. Its divine fever meant to burn away the infection and cleanse the earth. Ra commanded her to descend and punish the mortals who had schemed against him, to re-establish his authority and remind the world what happens when Mat is broken. And so, the dreadful dawn arrived. Sekhmet descended upon the Nile Valley not as a queen, but as a sandstorm of teeth and claws. The very air grew hot with her passing. Her roars shattered the silence of the desert and shook the foundations of the grandest temples. Mortals who had once offered praise to the gods now fled in shrieking terror from this avatar of their wrath. She was relentless, a force of nature given a divine and singular purpose: to kill, She waded through the fields of humanity, the scent of blood filling her nostrils, her leonine heart exulting in the slaughter. The plan was working. Humanity was learning its lesson in the most brutal way imaginable. But as the blood flowed, something unforeseen began to happen within the goddess herself. The fire of retribution had ignited a thirst, a terrible, scheming for destruction itself. The instrument of justice had become an engine of annihilation, drunk on carnage and deaf to reason. Gods had unleashed a power they could no longer command. How do you stop a goddess who has tasted oblivion and found it sweet? In the twilight of his reign, the great sun god Ra had grown old. His bones were like silver, his flesh like gold, and his hair the deepest lapis lazuli. But as his divine light began to wane, a shadow grew in the hearts of humanity. The very creatures he had fashioned from his own tears began to mock him. Whispers of sedition, born in the fertile Nile Delta, spread like a plague across the land. They plotted against his authority, scoffing at his age, believing the creator of all could be so easily cast aside. This was not merely treason. It was a violation of Mat, the sacred cosmic order that held the universe in balance. The insolence of mortals echoed in the halls of the heavens, and Ra's sorrow curdled into a righteous, all-consuming fury. From the burning fire of his divine eye, he plucked his vengeance. He molded it, gave it form, and breathed into it a terrible, singular purpose. He created an extension of his own wrath, a weapon of divine retribution. He created Sekhmet. She descended upon the earth not as a queen, but as a plague, a storm of teeth and claws. Her roar was the tremor that splits the rock, her breath the searing desert wind that scours the flesh from bone. Imagine the terror, a goddess wreathed in fire and blood, moving with the impossible speed of a striking viper and the unyielding force of a collapsing mountain. She stalked through villages and cities, her laughter the crackle of burning homes. She was the lioness of the slaughter, the lady of flame, and her hunt had just begun. There was no negotiation, no plea for mercy that could quell the inferno of her rage. She was an instrument of the sun god's anger, perfect and absolute in her function. The scale of the carnage was apocalyptic. The sands of the desert, once gold, turned a sickening crimson. The great river Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, was said to have run red, choked with the ruin of 1,000,000 lives. The ancient stories, recorded in what we now call the Book of the Heavenly Cow, speak not of a battle, but of a cleansing, a divine scouring of the earth. Sekhmet waded through fields of the slain, her thirst growing with every life she took. She became drunk on the slaughter, ties her divine purpose corrupted by an insatiable bloodlust. High in the heavens, Ra watched the massacre unfold. The scent of blood, once the satisfying aroma of justice, now became a sickening stench that permeated his celestial palace. He had wanted to punish mankind, to remind them of his power, not to erase them from creation. But the weapon he had forged was too perfect. Her rampage was no longer his will, it was her own. He saw his own fury reflected in her relentless destruction, and a terrifying regret began to dawn. This was not justice. This was annihilation. It's the end of everything he had created. As humanity teetered on the brink of extinction, the other gods could no longer stand by. A desperate council was convened. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, understood that a force like Sekhmet could not be met with force. To challenge her was to be consumed by her fire. Isis, the great enchantress, knew that a direct confrontation was suicide. They were faced with an impossible dilemma. Their creator had unleashed a power he could not control, a goddess whose very nature was to kill. How do you stop a god from completing the very task for which she was created, with the fate of humanity hanging by a single blood-soaked thread? The gods of Egypt had to devise a plan of deception of cosmic proportions to halt the unstoppable and pacify the unquenchable rage of Sekhmet. The Eye of Ra, humanity's final hour, had come. From his solar barge, the great god Ra looked down upon the ruin his own daughter had wrought. The very creation he had so carefully crafted was being washed away in a tide of blood. He had unleashed a force of nature, a divine instrument of justice, but the instrument had forgotten its purpose, succumbing to an insatiable, mindless lust for destruction. He had to intervene. But how do you stop a goddess who is the embodiment of your own divine fury? Calling his celestial council, a plan was forged not of war, but of cunning deception. Ra commanded his messengers to race to the island of Elephantine, deep in the south, and gather vast quantities of red ochre, a mineral the color of dried blood. He then ordered the priestesses at his temple in Heliopolis to brew a monumental amount of beer, 7,000 jars of it, a quantity so vast it was meant to flood the entire landscape. As night fell, the gods worked feverishly, mixing the crimson powder into the golden brew until it swirled with the dark, inviting hue of human gore. Under the cover of darkness, poured the mixture across the fields of Egypt, where Sekhmet was expected to continue her massacre at dawn. As the first rays of the sun struck the valley, Sekhmet awoke, her throat parched for slaughter. She strode forth, muscles coiled, ready to tear the world asunder. But then she stopped. Before her, the fields were not filled with cowering mortals, but were flooded, shimmering under the morning light with a deep, intoxicating red. It was a lake of blood, a feast laid out just for her. Lowering her great leonine head, she began to drink, lapping up the liquid with savage delight. She drank and drank, the sheer volume of blood a testament to her power. But as she consumed the divine offering, a strange warmth spread through her limbs. The sharp edge of her rage began to dull. Her vision softened, the world losing its harsh, violent focus. It's the intoxicating power of the beer, the symbol of celebration, and life was seeping into the goddess of death. Her ferocious roar subsided into a contented purr, her bloodlust dissolving into a blissful stupor. The mighty Sekhmet, the invincible, the lady of slaughter, finally laid her head down upon the red-stained earth and fell into a deep, drunken sleep. When she awoke, the world was quiet. The burning fire in her soul had been banked, quenched not by defeat, but by clever pacification. The mindless rage was gone. In its place was a dawning awareness. She saw the devastation she had caused, the near extinction of the creatures her father had made. And in that moment, a profound transformation occurred. The destroyer became a guardian. The Eye of Ra, once an instrument of pure annihilation, was now recalibrated. Humanity was spared, and the cosmic order, the delicate principle of Mat, was pulled back from the brink of oblivion. This miraculous salvation was never forgotten. To ensure Sekhmet's fury remained dormant, the Egyptians created one of their most unique religious ceremonies, the Festival of Drunkenness. Annually, worshippers would gather at her temples, drinking, singing, and celebrating with wine and beer until they passed into a divine stupor, ritually reenacting the myth that saved their ancestors. It was a festival of relief, a way of appeasing the goddess by offering her the very thing that had once calmed her rage. The myth is more than a simple story of a drunken goddess. It is a profound exploration of balance. It teaches of the thin line between justice and vengeance, order and chaos. Was Sekhmet truly redeemed, or was her essential nature merely suppressed? It suggests that even the most destructive force in the cosmos contains the potential for its opposite, that within the heart of the slayer also beats the heart of the savior. A ferocity that could end the world was the same ferocity that could protect it. The rage was not erased, but harnessed. The goddess of destruction now slept, and humanity could rebuild under the watchful eyes of the gods. But the power that had nearly unmade creation was not gone. It was merely changed. It had been given a new purpose. For what becomes of a goddess of war when the war is over? And how does a civilization worship the very force that almost wiped it from existence? The slaughter was over. A world saved by divine trickery and red-tinted beer. But when the dust settled and the drunken lioness awoke, the terror she had unleashed did not simply vanish. It lingered in the memory of the Nile, a permanent scar on the consciousness of humanity. A power this absolute, this catastrophic, cannot be unmade. It can only be transformed. And here lies the most profound paradox of the lioness goddess. The very deity who personified plague, its breath was the scorching desert wind carrying sickness, was the same one Egyptians prayed to for health and protection. She who could end the world was the one they trusted to preserve it. She was both the poison and the antidote. As a bringer of pestilence, her power was terrifyingly intimate. Illness was not a random misfortune. It was a personal judgment, a sign of her displeasure. The Egyptians believed she could unleash 7 supernatural arrows, metaphysical bolts of plague and suffering that struck without warning. Her demonic messengers, the slaughterers of Sekhmet, were said to roam the land, especially at the most vulnerable transitions of the day and year, carrying out her grim work. To fall ill was to fall into the shadow of the lioness, and yet, if you were to seek out the most skilled physician in ancient Egypt, you would likely be directed to her temple. The priests of Sekhmet were not just clerics, they were masters of medicine. They understood that to combat a disease, one must first understand its source. By dedicating themselves to the goddess of destruction, they sought to comprehend the very mechanics of affliction, to know the mind of the entity who held life and death in her hands. She invoked her not to smite their enemies, but to guide their own hands in the delicate work of healing. She who could break the body was also the ultimate authority on how to mend it. How can such a violent contradiction exist in one being? To the ancient mind, it was no contradiction at all. It was balance. It was the law of the universe, what they called Mat. Sekhmet represented a fundamental truth. Destruction is often the necessary prelude to creation. Tiva must burn too. Kill an infection. A controlled fire clears a field to allow for new growth. Her rage wasn't just chaos, it was a violent, purifying force, a cosmic cauterization meant to restore order, even if the process itself was agonizing. The average Egyptian understood this terrifying balance and lived their life accordingly. Appeasing Sekhmet was a daily concern. Offerings of beer and wine were laid at her statues, reminders of the mercy that had saved their ancestors. Prayers were chanted to cool her hot temper, and for personal protection, they wore amulets carved in her image, not as a celebration of her wrath, but as a plea for her protective, motherly aspect. They were small shields, not against a foreign enemy, but against the goddess's own potential fury, invoking the healer to hold the destroyer at bay. This potent duality resonates even now. thousands of years after her last temples fell silent. In modern psychology, we speak of integrating the shadow self, the parts of our psyche we fear or repress. Sekhmet is the ultimate embodiment of this integration. She is a symbol of the ferocious, untamable power that lies within all of us, a reminder that our capacity for destruction must be acknowledged and respected before it can be channeled into healing and creation. She teaches that true power is not the absence of rage, but its mastery. This complex, terrifying, and nurturing goddess was not just an idea. She was a consuming presence in the lives of the Egyptians. They sought to appease her, to capture her likeness in stone, creating a forest of statues on a scale almost unparalleled in the ancient world. But why so many? What was the true purpose of this vast army of granite guardians? And what secrets do they still hold, silent and waiting, in the ruins of Egypt's greatest temples? But to see Sekhmet as only a vessel of mindless destruction is to misunderstand the very heart of the Egyptian cosmos. Her terrifying power was never chaos for its own sake. It was a divine instrument, a brutal but necessary force in the service of a concept that underpinned all of creation. Mat was the primordial principle of truth, justice, balance, and cosmic order. It was the force that held the stars in the sky, that made the Nile flood, and that ensured the sun would rise each morning. Anything that threatened this delicate harmony, rebellion, injustice, foreign invasion, or even the spread of disease, was a form of chaos, a cosmic sickness that had to be purged. Sekhmet was the divine surgeon. Her fury was the scalpel that cut away the infection, ensuring the survival of the whole. Her destruction was not an ending, but a violent, purifying reset. Nowhere was this protection more critical than around the figure of the pharaoh. The king of Egypt was not merely a ruler. He was the earthly embodiment of Horus, the living anchor of Mat-Hem. An attack on the pharaoh was an attack on the cosmic order itself, a toga, and so Sekhmet became his ultimate guardian, the fearsome power that stood between the throne and the forces of dissolution. Pharaohs would claim the title beloved of Sekhmet, invoking her name to sanctify their rule and terrify their enemies. The great king Amenhotep III built hundreds of statues of her, an army of granite goddesses standing eternal watch over his mortuary temple, testament to his profound reliance on her protective power. This divine patronage extended directly to the battlefield. War, to the Egyptians, was the ultimate act of restoring Mat against the chaos of foreign enemies. Chariots thundering across the sand, not just with soldiers, but emblazoned with the roaring visage of the Lioness. Her image was a weapon in itself, a symbol of the pharaoh's sacred duty to crush those who would defy the gods. She was the divine fury in the heart of the Egyptian soldier, the promise of a victory that was not just military, but cosmic. When the pharaoh returned, triumphant, war, it was Sekhmet who was praised for overthrowing the Jehinu, or trampling the Nubians. His victories were her victories. Her role as guardian, however, went far beyond the borders of the kingdom or the life of the king. She was a shield against the unseen world, against the malevolent spirits that lurked in the darkness, the demons that brought sickness and misfortune. She was invoked in protective spells and magical amulets, a fierce presence, to ward off any evil that sought to unravel the fabric of an ordinary life. Every threat, from a foreign army massing at the border to a venomous snake in the reeds, was a disruption of Mat. And Sekhmet, the unblinking, unyielding eye of Ra, was the eternal answer to them all. Her vigilance never wavered. She was the raw, active power of the sun, forever watching, forever ready to pounce on any shadow that threatened the light. She was the purifying fire in the unshakable shield, Kea goddess whose violence preserved creation, whose terror maintained order, occasion. But this fierce protector, whose very breath was the desert wind, and whose rage could bring plagues upon the land, held a stunning secret, a paradox that lies at the very center of her being. For how could it be that the goddess known as the bringer of pestilence was also the one Egyptians prayed to for healing? To behold an image of Sekhmet is to witness power given form. She is not human with the head of an animal. She is the lioness, an embodiment of nature's most formidable predator, Albi. The ancient Egyptians chose this form with breathtaking precision. The lioness was the ultimate hunter of the Nile Valley, a creature of raw, explosive force, silent stalking, and lethal finality. Her ferocity was a perfect mirror for the goddess of war and plague. But the lioness was also a symbol of royalty and motherhood, a fierce protector of her young. In Sekhmet, these traits merge. She is both the unmaking fury of the wild and the unyielding guardian of the pharaoh and the cosmic order of Mat. Crowning her head, we see the very source of her being, the gleaming sun disk. This is not mere decoration. It is her divine birthright, a direct link to her father, the sun god Ra. She is his fiery eye, the physical manifestation of his destructive, cleansing light. Coiled around the disk is the Urius, the rearing cobra, a symbol of divine authority and instant death to all who would challenge the gods. This solar crown declares her origin and her purpose. She is the heat of the noonday sun, a power that can nurture the crops or scorch the land to dust. Her very presence is a reminder that the sun which gives life can also bring burning death. But look closer, past the terrifying visage to what she holds in her hands. Here lies the great paradox of Sekhmet. In one hand, she often carries the Ankh, the quintessential symbol of life itself. The destroyer holds the key to existence. In her other hand, she may hold a papyrus scepter, representing the flourishing green marshes of the Nile, a symbol of growth, youth, and prosperity. How can the goddess of slaughter also be a champion of life? It is because, in the Egyptian worldview, destruction was never the end. It was a necessary clearing of the way for renewal. To bring life, Sekhmet first had to annihilate corruption, sickness, and chaos. She wields death to protect life. Her essence is further captured in the colors that define her. She is the Lady of the Red Linen, a color saturated with meaning. Red was the color of blood and infernal fire, the chaos of the desert sands, and the rage that fueled her rampage. Yet, red was also the color of life-giving blood, of vitality, and of the protective magic of carnelian amulets. Ter, other color, is gold, the flesh of the gods. It represents the eternal, imperishable light of the sun, her divine nature, and her immense value to the cosmos. Red is her volatile power. Gold is her eternal divinity. Across the temples and tombs of Egypt, artists struggled to capture this terrifying duality. Carved from black granodiorite, they radiate a cold, formidable power. Her face is rarely contorted in a snarl. Instead, her expression is one of a terrifying calm, a serene immanence. 'Tis the stillness of a predator that knows its strength, the patient gaze of a deity who has witnessed the birth and death of stars. She is not mindlessly angry. She is divine judgment, patient and absolute. Her image was therefore more than a portrait. It was a theological statement. It was a constant, visceral reminder of the razor's edge upon which civilization existed. She was both the threat of annihilation and the promise of fierce protection. Iconography was a language of power, understood by kings and commoners alike, a force that has lost none of its chilling majesty over 3 millennia. Her very form was a warning, but to the ancient Egyptians, she was not a distant, abstract threat. She was a living presence in their lives. So how did they dare to approach her? How did one worship a goddess whose appeasement was the only thing standing between humanity and utter oblivion? To manage such a terrifying and unpredictable power, the Egyptians did not merely whisper prayers into the wind. They built fortresses of faith, epicenters of worship designed to contain, channel, and appease the fury of the Lioness. While her primary cult center was in Memphis, where she formed a divine family with the creator god Ptah and their son Nefertum. It was 250 miles to the south, in the heart of the Egyptian Empire, that her worship would be immortalized in stone. This was Thebes, what the Egyptians called Waset, and at its core was the Karnak Temple complex, the largest religious building ever constructed. Within this sprawling sanctuary, in the sacred precinct dedicated to the goddess Mut, one pharaoh would undertake a project of staggering ambition, born out of profound fear and desperation. His name was Amenhotep III, a ruler at the zenith of Egypt's power. But power offers little protection from divine wrath. It was here that Amenhotep commissioned an army of statues, a legion carved from black granodiorite, each one a seated image of the goddess Sekhmet. Imagine walking through the courtyards of the temple, not with a handful of divine images, but surrounded by a silent, watchful forest of hundreds of lioness goddesses, their polished stone eyes gleaming in the Egyptian sun. The scale is almost incomprehensible, so why do it? The prevailing theory is as precise as it is astonishing. Scholars believe Amenhotep may have commissioned 730 statues, one for the morning and one for the evening of every single day of the year. It was a perpetual, granite calendar of appeasement. This colossal undertaking was a desperate plea for divine intervention. It was an attempt to placate Sekhmet on an industrial scale, to ensure that not a single moment passed when she was not honored. Not a single day dawned when her rage might go unchecked. By surrounding the temple with her image, the pharaoh hoped to trap her pestilence and prevent plagues from sweeping through the land. Each statue was a lightning rod, intended to attract and neutralize a sliver of her infinite, destructive potential. Daily, life within these sanctuaries was a constant, careful negotiation with the goddess. Her priests and priestesses, specialists in divine diplomacy, performed meticulous rituals. They would anoint the statues with sacred oils, drape them in fine linen, and burn incense to calm the air. Offerings were made, not just of bread and meat, but of beer, dyed red with pomegranate or hematite, a symbolic substitute for the blood she craved after her near destruction of humanity. They offered cool water to quench her fiery heart, and whispered incantations to invoke her merciful, healing aspect over her terrifying, destructive one. The architecture of her shrines reflected this tension. They were often dark, intimate spaces, designed to feel like a lion's den, a place of immense power where one entered with humility and caution. But who were these people? These ritual specialists who walked among the stone lions and looked into the face of destruction every day. They were more than just priests offering prayers. They were known by a specific, telling name, a name that reveals their true function was not just to worship the lioness, but to battle the very demons she unleashed. To wield the power of plague and pestilence was to hold the fate of Egypt in one's hands, but to also hold the cure. That was a power that demanded reverence, and a terror that required careful management. How did a civilization coexist with a deity who could be both its destroyer and its savior? Did the answer lay in a unique and highly specialized clergy? Men and women who dared to stand before the Lioness. They were the Wab priests of Sekhmet, an elite class of spiritual practitioners in the hierarchy of the Egyptian pantheon. Serving a goddess of such volatile power was a position of immense respect and immense risk. They were not mere chanters of hymns. They were masters of a dangerous divine science, tasked with channeling, pacifying, and directing the raw, tamed energy of their goddess. Imagine a world where your doctor was also your priest, where a prescription was both a physical remedy and a divine appeal. This was the world of Sekhmet's clergy. For them, medicine and magic were not separate disciplines. They understood that the body and the spirit were inextricably linked. To heal one, you had to treat the other. They combined clinical observation and practical remedies with sacred incantations, cueing illness as a spiritual imbalance that required a divine intervention. Their rituals were a delicate art of appeasement. In sanctuaries, heavy with the scent of Kifi incense, they would perform rites to soothe the goddess's rage. They offered vast quantities of beer, dyed red with ochre or pomegranate juice, a symbolic substitute for the human blood she once craved. Litanies were chanted, not just in praise, but as a form of powerful negotiation, beseeching the Lady of Dread to manifest her gentler aspect, the Lady of Life. The greatest fear was the invisible onslaught of disease, which the Egyptians believed was carried on the wind by her demonic messengers. They called them the 7 arrows of Sekhmet, Spuj. Each arrow was a different affliction, a specific plague sent to punish humanity for its transgressions. The primary role of Sekhmet's clergy was to create the counter-magic. They developed an intricate system of spiritual pharmacology, creating potent remedies from herbs, minerals, and animal products, each prescribed alongside a specific incantation to neutralize the divine poison of her arrows. Protective amulets bearing her image were worn not as decoration, but as spiritual armor. In an age with no knowledge of microbiology, these priests and priestesses were the spiritual guardians of public health. When an epidemic swept through the crowded cities along the Nile, it was seen as Sekhmet's breath, a sign of her profound displeasure. While others fled, her clergy walked toward the sickness. They were the front line, a corps of plague doctors, who battled not with medicine alone, but with prayer, ritual, and a deep understanding of their goddess's fearsome heart. They stood as the essential barrier, the only hope between the Egyptian people and the fury of the Lioness. Their knowledge was the kingdom's most vital resource, but their most enduring legacy was not written on papyrus, but carved in stone. Hundreds upon hundreds of black granite statues, an army of goddesses frozen in time, staring out with an eternal, unnerving gaze. It's an enigmatic feat of devotion that raises a far more unsettling question. Were these monuments of worship, or were they instruments of a desperate, nationwide ritual built out of absolute fear? Humanity was spared not by an act of divine mercy, but by an ocean of beer dyed the color of blood. And every year, at the height of summer, just before the life-giving flood of the Nile, the Egyptians would remember this terrifying salvation in the most extraordinary way imaginable. They would reenact it. This was the Tik, the festival of drunkenness. It was one of the most important and widely celebrated festivals in the Egyptian calendar. Inscriptions from the Temple of Mut at Karnak and others describe pilgrims arriving by the thousands, each carrying offerings and a vessel for beer. As the scorching sun dipped below the horizon, the air would fill with the sound of drums, the rattle of the sistrum, and the hypnotic melodies of flutes. Kenda. The drinking would begin. This was not a simple feast. It was a religious duty. The goal was ecstatic abandon, a state of divine intoxication where the boundaries between the human and the divine would blur. They drank, danced, and sang until they collapsed. Losing themselves in the goddess, imagine a prayer offered not with quiet reverence, but with chaotic, joyous inebriation. This was the festival's true purpose. It was a powerful act of preventative magic by replaying the moment of Sekhmet's pacification on a colossal scale. Her devotees were ritually reinforcing it for the year to come. They drank so that the goddess herself would remember her own slumber, not her fury. Beer was an offering, a plea to avert the demons of the year, the plagues, famines, and fevers that she commanded. They were showing the goddess her own salvation, and in doing so, ensuring theirs. But the symbolism ran even deeper, tying the goddess to the very rhythms of Egypt. The festival was celebrated at the beginning of the annual inundation of the Nile, a time of immense natural power that was both destructive and creative. The old dry land was drowned beneath chaotic waters, only to re-emerge fertile and renewed. In the same way, the festival's ritual chaos allowed for a symbolic drowning of the old year's fears and anxieties. It was a communal purging, a necessary descent into disorder before order and life could be reborn with the coming harvest. Today, scholars see this not as a simple indulgence, but as a profoundly sophisticated ceremony. It was a form of mass catharsis, a way for an entire civilization to confront its deepest existential terrors, the fragility of life, the inevitability of death, and the terrifying power of the gods. In the shared experience of the festival, these fears were met not with solemnity, but with a wild, life-affirming joy. It was a psychological masterstroke, binding the community together and reinforcing their resilience against a hostile world. The goal was always the same: to soothe the raging lioness, to lull her destructive instincts, to sleep with music and win dark beer. But what emerged when the rage was quieted, after the drunkenness faded and the sun rose on a new, safer year? Was she still Sekhmet, the Lady of Slaughter? Did this ritual of appeasement transform her into something else entirely? The Egyptians believed it did, for within the heart of the lioness, another goddess was waiting to awaken. Even a goddess of such immense and terrifying power did not exist in isolation. For all her chaotic fury, Sekhmet was anchored in the Egyptian pantheon by one of the most significant divine families in the nation's history, the Memphite Triad. In the sprawling, ancient capital of Memphis, the center of political and religious life for millennia, Sekhmet was not simply the vengeful eye of Ra. Here, she was the revered and fearsome consort to a god who was her complete opposite, Ptah, the architect of the universe. Ptah was not a god of Ra's elemental force. He was a god of intellect, of creation through pure thought. According to Memphite theology, Ptah conceived the world in his heart and brought it into being simply by speaking the names of things. He was the divine artisan, the cosmic craftsman who fashioned the gods, the world, and humanity itself. Where Sekhmet's power was a wildfire, Ptah's was the meticulous design of a master builder. He was order, she was chaos. He was the quiet contemplation of creation. She was the deafening roar of destruction. Together, they represented a profound and necessary cosmic polarity. Imagine the child born of such a union, born from the master, creator, and the mighty destroyer was Nefertum, the god of the blue lotus flower. He was everything his parents were not: gentle, beautiful, a symbol of healing and rebirth. It was said that Nefertum arose from the first lotus blossom that bloomed from the primordial waters at the dawn of time. His scent was the perfume that soothed the gods, his presence a balm against suffering. He was the embodiment of the sun's first light, the promise of a new day after a night of uncertainty. This divine family was far more than a simple collection of gods. It was a living metaphor for the cycle of existence itself. How could the Egyptians reconcile such disparate forces? They saw it as a perfect, perpetual loop. Ptah creates the world in all its ordered splendor. Sekhmet, in her righteous fury, purges it of its imperfections, destroying what is corrupt and protecting what is sacred. And from that cleared ground, Nefertum rises, bringing healing, beauty, and the promise of renewal, creation, destruction, and rebirth, all contained within a single, sacred family. This need to find balance is seen in Sekhmet's other connections as well. Throughout Egypt, she was often syncretized or merged with other goddesses. Most famously, she was seen as the ferocious counterpart to the cat goddess Bastet. They were two faces of a single, divine feminine power. Bastet was the gentle, nurturing warmth of the sun, the playful, domestic cat. Sekhmet was the scorching, untamable heat of the midday sun, the ferocious desert lioness. One gave life, the other could take it away, yet both were essential protectors of Egypt. Later, in Thebes, she would be linked with Mut, the great mother goddess and consort of Amun-Ra, absorbing Sekhmet's fierce protective instincts into a new, powerful triad. She was a goddess of infinite complexity, a destroyer who was part of a creative family, a bringer of plague who was mother to a god of healing. This divine family, this perfect cycle of cosmic forces, was not merely an abstract concept for the Egyptians, was a reality they lived with, a power they sought to appease and understand. Her destructive power, Khan's unleashed upon humanity, could never be fully recalled. It lingered in the world, a latent threat coiled in the heart of the lioness. When her divine balance was disturbed, when humanity's actions angered the gods, her fury was not a distant, abstract thing. It manifested in a form more terrifying than any army. Disease. To the ancient Egyptians, sudden illness and raging epidemics were not random acts of nature. They were divine messages, punishments sent from an enraged goddess. They were known as the 7 arrows of Sekhmet. These arrows were not physical projectiles, but metaphorical carriers of pestilence, each representing a different affliction sent by her demonic messengers, the Necheruanku, or slaughtering demons. Each arrow was a distinct terror, a specific nightmare given form. One might be the burning fever that stole the senses. Another, the agonizing sores that erupted on the skin. A third could be the pestilence that swept through a city, leaving a trail of death in the suffocating summer heat. They were the unseen barbs of scorpion stings, the wasting sickness that hollowed a person from within. The sudden plague that could fell a healthy farmer in his field by dusk. To be struck by an arrow of Sekhmet was to feel the goddess's personal, scalding hot displeasure. But the Egyptians were not a people to surrender to despair. For every divine affliction, they sought a divine remedy. They believed that the one who dealt the wound was also the only one who held the cure. And so, they turned to her own clergy for salvation. The priests of Sekhmet were not merely custodians of her temples, They were Egypt's first line of defense, gating a unique brotherhood of physicians and magicians. The priest healer had to know the difference. He would consult ancient texts, read the omens, and then prescribe a complex treatment. A magical incantation would be recited, a spell to turn back the demonic messenger who carried the arrow. The words themselves were medicine, designed to placate the goddess, to appeal to her merciful side, begging her to transform from Sekhmet, the destroyer, into Sekhmet, the healer. This spiritual warfare was waged alongside practical medicine. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents in the world, contains hundreds of remedies, many of which would have been used by Sekhmet's priests. They compounded poultices from honey and herbs, known for their antiseptic properties. They administered potions of willow bark to fight fever. Amulets, bearing the image of the goddess, were placed on the sick, not just as magical talismans, but as powerful symbols of hope and protection, a physical plea for her to withdraw her wrath. Yet, treatment was a desperate gamble. Keeping the Lady of Slaughter appeased was a statewide obsession, a constant, delicate negotiation with a volatile deity. Daily offerings of beer and food were laid at the feet of her statues, chanted at dawn and dusk to cool her hot temper. Great festivals were held in her honor, designed to soothe her rage with music, dance, and ritual intoxication, reminding her of the moment her bloodlust was first quenched. The hundreds of statues, commissioned by Amenhotep III, were not just monuments of devotion. They were a formidable, stone-carved barrier against plague, an eternal effort to keep the 7 arrows in their quiver. Every prayer, every spell, every statue was part of an intricate system designed to manage a terrifying, cosmic force. The Egyptians lived under her shadow, forever attempting to balance her destructive impulses with her capacity for healing. The sands of time have buried temples and silenced ancient hymns. But a power like Sekhmet does not simply fade. She was not a goddess to be forgotten. In the quiet corners of the modern world, her name is whispered once more, her power invoked, her presence felt. The Lady of Slaughter roars back to life for a new generation of spiritual seekers, modern pagans, comedic revivalists, and practitioners of Wicca. Sekhmet has become a profound and vital force. They see beyond the ancient tales of destruction, finding in her a patron of transformation. For many, the answer is Sekhmet. She is the fierce surgeon who cuts away the disease of the soul, the righteous judge who champions the oppressed, and the powerful healer who can mend the deepest wounds. Her followers do not pray for gentle comfort. They pray for the strength to endure the fire and be forged anew. Her formidable image stalks our modern imagination, a potent symbol in art, literature, and even our digital worlds. From the pages of fantasy novels where lion-headed warriors display her ferocity, to video games that cast her as a powerful, divine adversary. Her iconography is instantly recognizable. In some modern esoteric traditions, her image is used as a focal point for meditations on personal power and justice. Artists sculpt her likeness not in stone, but in steel and code, a testament to a form so powerful it transcends millennia. She has become an archetype reborn, a myth that refuses to be a relic. This resurgence is powerfully intertwined with a modern revaluation of feminine strength. From a feminist perspective, Sekhmet is an icon of reclaimed power. She is not a goddess defined by a husband or a son, but by her own intrinsic might and agency. Her rage is not hysterical or chaotic. It is purposeful, a righteous fury against injustice and imbalance. K in a world still grappling with gender inequality. A T, she represents the unapologetic force of female authority, the validation of anger as a tool for change, and the freedom to be both creator and destroyer. Psychologically, she embodies a concept we often fear to confront, the shadow self. In Jungian terms, Sekhmet is the untamed, it's primal power that dwells within us, all the capacity for rage, for destruction, for necessary endings. To deny this shadow is to be weakened by it, but to face it, to integrate it, is to achieve a profound form of self-empowerment. Sekhmet teaches that true strength lies not in suppressing our ferocity, but in harnessing it with will and wisdom. Even our planet's modern struggles find a voice in this ancient goddess. As a lioness, the apex predator of the wild lands, Sekhmet is being re-envisioned as a fierce symbol of environmental conservation. Her destructive plague can be seen as a metaphor for nature's response to humanity's transgressions. She is the roar of the wild, a divine warning against a world out of balance, and as we reinterpret her meaning, we are still uncovering her past. Archaeologists continue to unearth statues and temple fragments, each discovery adding a new line to her epic story. The great goddess of Egypt is not a closed book. She is a living mystery, her secrets still buried, waiting beneath the sand. She has been a plague, a protector, a healer, and a monster. Today, she is an icon, a symbol, a psychological mirror. But in this modern revival, are we rediscovering the true goddess of the ancients, or are we simply creating a new one in our own image, a reflection of the power we desperately wish to find in ourselves? The scorching power of Sekhmet, a terrifying fusion of woman and beast, seems a uniquely Egyptian nightmare. But was this vision born only from the Nile's black soil? Or does her roar echo in the myths of other lands? Is the lioness-headed goddess an isolated terror, or a universal archetype, a primal fear and reverence shared by all humanity? Across cultures and continents, we find her sisters, goddesses, who embody the same untamable, fierce, feminine power. Travel east from the Nile to the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia. Here, the goddess Inanna, later known as Ishtar, rode into battle. She was the queen of heaven, a deity of love and fertility, but also of war and divine fury. Akkadian hymns describe her as a roaring lion, and art depicts her with weapons. Her foot planted firmly on the back of a lion, a symbol of her mastery over the most savage forces of nature. Like Sekhmet, Ishtar's wrath was a tool of divine order, a terrible storm that could level cities and humble kings. While Sekhmet's rage was a targeted, purifying fire sent by Ra, Ishtar's was often more personal, more tempestuous, yet they both drew from the same well of awesome, destructive might. But even within Africa, the lion god archetype was not Sekhmet's alone. It took on other forms, even other genders. In the Egyptian pantheon itself, we find Myaz, the lion-headed god of war and slaughter. Often called the son of Sekhmet, he was the heir to his mother's fury, a lord of the massacre who punished those who violated divine law. One of his titles was the one who is true before her, a direct acknowledgement of his role as an enforcer for his mother, the ultimate judge. He was the living embodiment of her destructive power, a protector of the pharaoh and the divine order, proving that the ferocity of the lion was a force so potent, predictive father a lineage of gods. Thousands of miles away, on the Indian subcontinent, the roar is heard again, perhaps louder than ever. Here, the great goddess, Durga, rides a lion, or sometimes a tiger, into battle. She is a warrior goddess, created by the combined energies of all the gods to defeat a demon that none of them could vanquish alone. She is the ultimate protector, a vision of magnificent, righteous wrath, and when her fury reaches its zenith, from her own brow springs an even more terrifying form, the dark goddess Kali, dripping with blood, wielding a severed head. Kali is destruction incarnate. Yet, like Sekhmet, her terrifying aspect serves a higher purpose. She is a slayer of demons, a liberator of souls, a fierce mother who destroys evil to protect her children. Her rage is a cleansing fire, burning away the impurities of the universe. Why the lioness? Across these disparate cultures, the symbolism is strikingly consistent. The lion is the king, a symbol of royalty, strength, and raw, solar power. But the lioness, she is the protector of the pride, the embodiment of lethal, maternal instinct. She is the fury that erupts, not for ego or for conquest, but for the sacred duty of protection. She is the paradox of life itself. The power that gives birth is the same power that can kill without hesitation. These goddesses are the guardians at the gate of chaos, the divine fury that protects creation by threatening to unmake it. They are the necessary violence of a cosmos that must sometimes be torn down to be reborn. They represent the terrifying truth that some healing can only begin after a devastating fire. The myths tell us of their world-shattering rage, but how did mortal priests and pharaohs dare to approach the living embodiment of divine destruction? How did they seek to channel her power without being utterly consumed by it? From the blood-soaked fields of a world brought to its knees, a difficult wisdom emerges. The story of Sekhmet, the Mighty One, is not merely a myth of divine retribution. It is a profound and unsettling lesson on the fundamental nature of existence. We are taught to fear destruction, to see it as the ultimate evil, the absolute end. But the ancient mind, which conceived of Sekhmet, understood a deeper, cyclical truth. Cycling every year in the flooding of the Nile, a destructive force that swept away the old land, only to deposit the rich, black silt from which all new life would spring. This is the core of Sekhmet's wisdom. She is the cosmic wildfire that clears the forest floor, allowing new seeds to find the sun. She represents the terrifying yet essential principle that for creation to occur, something must first be uncreated. The stagnant, the things which prevent growth, these are her targets. Her destruction is not chaos for its own sake. It is a brutal, divine reset, a clearing of the slate so that a better future can be written. And yet, her story is also a stark warning about the razor's edge upon which all power rests. The unbridled rage of the goddess, a force intended to restore balance, nearly resulted in total annihilation. What, then, is the difference between a righteous champion and a mindless destroyer? The answer lies in her duality. Her transformation into the goddess of healing is not a rejection of her power, but its perfect complement, the recognition that the strength to break a bone is meaningless without the knowledge to set it. The lioness who brings down the great buffalo is the same lioness who tenderly cleans her cubs. This is the balance Sekhmet demands of us, to cultivate the courage to act with decisive force against injustice, but to temper it with the wisdom to know when to offer healing and mercy. This divine dilemma echoes through the halls of human power. Sekhmet's story is a timeless allegory for the responsibility that comes with influence, whether it belongs to a king, a general, a corporation, or an individual. The power to wage war, to shape nations, to alter the very climate of our planet. This is the fire of Sekhmet in human hands, and her myth serves as the ultimate cautionary tale. When power is wielded without compassion, without foresight, without a profound respect for life, it will inevitably turn on its wielder, consuming everything in its path. Perhaps her most intimate lesson is the one she offers to the individual. We all harbor an inner Sekhmet, a core of righteous anger, a capacity for fierce, decisive action. It is the shadow self we are often taught to fear, to suppress. But the Lady of Flame teaches us that this power is not an enemy to be vanquished, but a force to be understood and mastered. It is the energy that severs toxic relationships, the fury that drives societal change, the untamable will that says no more. To deny this inner fire is to leave ourselves vulnerable. The wisdom of the lioness is to acknowledge its existence, to feel its heat, and to learn to channel it constructively, using its power to protect and build, not just to burn. Thousands of years have passed. Empires have risen and crumbled to dust. But the figure of the lioness goddess remains, her gaze fixed upon us from across the chasm of time. She endures because the truths she embodies are eternal. She is a mirror to our turbulent age-a-world, grappling with necessary destruction and the desperate need for renewal. She is the potent, unsettling reminder that chaos and order, ferocity and tenderness, destruction and creation are not opposites. They are inseparable partners in the great cosmic dance. Her wisdom, forged in fire and blood, is not a relic of a distant past. It is a vital, living blueprint for navigating the future that we, like the gods of old, must build from the ashes of our present. The lioness's roar echoes still, a challenge across millennia. Now, you must confront the power within. Will you be the fire that consumes, or the flame that purifies and heals? The sacred balance between creation and destruction is not just a myth, it is the choice you make every day.